Hello and welcome to this video, and in this video I'm going to be asking the question that many progressive rock fans seem to ask on the internet, and that is it prog? That's not prog. We know what prog is. How dare you put this on this forum or in this discussion group, because that's not prog. And there the big discussion always starts to emerge. So I thought I'd like to discuss this, as it became very apparent yesterday in a conversation that I had with the great progressive rock fan from the website Progressive Aspect, Leo Trimming. And we sat down at a prog festival yesterday, because yesterday I had my return to gigging with my band Rant, which is a progressive rock band. And it was lovely to do our first gig and be able to get in front of an audience. And I thought it'd be interesting to talk a little bit about the band Rant and how it was developed, and how this question of is it prog has cropped up a few times, and how that relates to me personally and my own experiences in the progressive rock world. So let us begin at the beginning. I am a big progressive rock fan. You know, I grew up in the early 80s. I first discovered the new wave of British heavy metal, which took me to classic rock bands. From classic rock bands, I naturally progressed to bands like Yes and Genesis and ELP. For me personally, I couldn't see how a band like the sort of rock bands, obviously like Rush and Led Zeppelin, how they were that much different from Yes or ELP. It was a natural progression for me. I couldn't really differentiate between, you know, Led Zeppelin, Rush, and say King Crimson, Genesis, Pink Floyd. They were just rock bands. But I really enjoyed some of the things that were going on in progressive rock. I think I liked the fact that it was technically difficult to play. I was learning the instrument and I wanted to hear what musicians could do. It was opening my ears to the possibilities you could do creatively. I was really interested in weird time signatures, and prog seemed to do that. I really liked sort of philosophical ideas. You know, I wasn't so much interested in songs about love. I was more interested in about people talking about time and space and mythical things. I found that really interesting. You know, conceptual ideas. I like stuff that was a bit quirky and strange. I really enjoyed stuff, you know, perhaps I was a little bit quirky and strange, and I like music that reflected that. So by the early 80s, I was a full-on prog fan, and I was going through my rock encyclopedia and going through all the different bands. Around that time, at the same time, I can remember I was reading Kerrang, which was like a heavy metal magazine in the early 80s here in the UK, and they started to cover a thing called neoprog. And neoprog was a sort of bizarre, it's like in the mid 80s, prog was like a dirty word. You'd had punk, and punk had come in and sort of done away with prog, or so it seemed. I have done a video about this because I don't think that was quite the case. But out of the prog scene, out of the punk scene, it emerged in the UK this scene called neoprog, and that was sort of keeping prog alive. And these bands were different to the 70s bands in that they were really wearing their influences on their sleeve. You know, they weren't trying to sound like the pop music at the time, although those influences were in there. But they were really going, you know, we really love bands like Genesis and Yes, and they were really, you know, sort of harkening back, which could be seen as not being progressive. Or is it? Is it the most progressive thing you could possibly do in 1984? You know, when everyone else is listening to Duran Duran or New Order, you know. So I was aware of those bands. So when I was older and I got the call from IQ, you know, that they were looking for a drummer, I was very excited, because I was excited to be able to really play a style of music that was interesting to me, you know, where I could feel like I could express myself, that I wasn't hemmed in by commerciality, that nobody was going to have a go at me for wanting to write a song that's 20 minutes long in 17/8. You know, that was an issue, that suddenly I was in a band that had an audience. This is what was exciting, where you could actually push the boundaries out. And so I started to work with in IQ, and from that, you know, I started to get a lot of session work, and I ended up working with the guys from a lot of the other neo-prog bands. You know, I worked with the guys from Pendragon and Palace, and I eventually got asked to form a band called Frost by a guy called Jem Godfrey, And that album was very exciting. When I heard that, I thought, yeah, this sounds like, this is truly progressive. It's pushing the boundaries of music, at that time. And I was very excited to be involved in that band. As time went on, I must admit I did get a little bit frustrated. And it's no criticism against those bands. What it was, and I didn't realise that at the time, is that I really wanted to write. Back then I was just a drummer, so I was playing other people's material, and that material was fantastic. I was very lucky to work with people like Jem Godfrey and IQ, who were such brilliant composers, and my job was to come up with the drum parts, and in that I had a lot of creative freedom. But I started to become a little bit frustrated because I really wanted to get involved in the writing much deeper. I wanted to be able to pick the guitar up or go to the keyboard or get it behind the computer and really write the music. I also was a little bit frustrated by how much the computers were being used by those bands at that time, and I think that's probably got even worse, that I felt, and this is only my personal opinion, that the computers were being used to really squeeze some of the life and creativity out of the music, make it too perfect. Part of the thing I really loved about those bands like King Crimson and Genesis is it felt like people in a room playing. You could hear things speeding up, slowing down as miss hits, and a certain, not scrappiness, but emotionalness was in that music, which I didn't feel was in a lot of the prog that was going on around me. So I got out of it, and I went away for a while, and I didn't do music for a while. And then I came back and started to do other music. I was interested in prog, and I formed a band called KUNDABUFFA. And KUNDABUFFA was really pulling into what I felt was the true progressive rock of our time. And that was bands like Noah and Louis Cole. It was people like Thundercat. It was rappers like Kendrick Lamar. I really was listening to those artists and go, well, these are true progressive artists. I still to this day think that Noah is the great progressive rock band of our time and do all the things that I expect a progressive rock band to do. But of course, and this is the point of this talk, I'm at odds with what a lot of people would say is progressive rock. They would say, well, that's just not progressive rock. Right? And we will get into the argument of whether it is or not in a bit. Let's just carry on with the story. So I formed a band called KUNDABUFFA, and I worked for a long time making an album which was called KUNDABUFFA, and that album came out to absolutely no interest whatsoever. And I sat back and I was quite surprised I was quite upset by this, to be honest, because I'd really put everything into this album. And I thought what would happen is that this tiny audience I have, those of you who kept in touch with me from when I was in IQ and Frost and still bothered to listen to anything I do, which is a tiny audience, I thought, maybe they'll see that this is proper progressive. This is proper progressive music. But they didn't. And I don't blame them, because it's so far away stylistically, perhaps, from what they would be listening to if they're prog fans. But if you're interested, if you pop across to my Bandcamp, I have a Bandcamp, Andy Edwards, in the Bandcamp, you'll find the KUNDABUFFA albums there, and you'll find all my other music there if you're interested in the sort of music I do. Now, my Bandcamp, that page is really for my own personal creative music. I don't expect anyone to listen to it. I would say I am a progressive music artist, and I would say the stuff on my Bandcamp is very, very progressive. I am pushing the envelope in every way I possibly can. I'm mixing genres, I'm delving into conceptual stuff, I'm really into long compositions, odd time signatures, sort of virtuoso playing. I feel that I'm a progressive artist. But the strange thing is the audience for progressive rock, I think, would find my stuff difficult. So me personally, here I am, struggling with this, how do I get my music out there? How do I sell it to these people who say they like progressive rock music but don't want to listen to anything that's actually progressing in any direction? They actually want to hear music that sounds like stuff they know already. That is a problem. So, I thought, why don't I make a progressive rock album? And so I decided to form a band. So I rang up my mate John Jarrett, who'd played bass with me in Frost and IQ, and he's a fantastic prog musician and really understands that world. I said, do you want to form a band? I'd had an idea of what I wanted to do, and he went, yeah, who have you got in mind? And I'd got this student called Miron, who was like a prodigy, incredible singer and a credible guitarist. and I wanted to bring him in. And then I'd worked for many years with a guy called Rob Growcut, and Rob is like, his dad was in ELO, his dad was Kelly Growcut. He grew up with the Beatles, and he grew up with real song-based songs. And one of the things I knew for progressive rock is the songs have to be really good. And Rob played guitar, keyboards, and he sang. And I said to Rob, do you want to come in as the sort of songwriter? We all write the songs, So we had this concept of, and the concept was full-on prog, do all the things, tick all the boxes, but also have some killer songs there, some really great vocal harmonies, some hummable tunes, And as soon as we formed this, as you may be aware, the whole world closed down. We formed in March 2020. And by the end of that month, we were all in isolation. So we had nothing better to do than just crack on and make an album, which we did. And it's this album, Rain. Singularity, my band's called Rain, and there's the album Singularity. There we go. There's the back cover. There's us there. If we could get the, there we go. So, this album's come out. And it's been pretty well received. A lot of people have liked it, and a lot of the prog audience that I have liked it. And so yesterday we did our first gig, and I was at a festival called Prog for Pert, which is a sort of tribute to Neil Peart. There's a ton of prog fans down there, and I got and sat chatting. So I ended up chatting to Leo Trimming about it. And one of the things he said to me is, he said, I really had to warn people about your album because he goes, I absolutely love it, but it's not really prog, is it? And I was really surprised, because here I have spent a year working with some of the best progressive rock musicians I know to make a full-on progressive rock album. And I said, well, it is. It's, we've got like a 10-minute song about a magician on there, We've got, and I started to, sort of in a jokey way, go through this. And he said, yes, but it doesn't really sound neoprog. And I found that a surprising comment as well, because neoprog to me, it were 80s bands that were harkening back to Genesis and Yes and King Crimson and Pink Floyd. So I started to point out some of the musical things. I said, well, if you listen to the bit in that song, that chord progression is taken, really influenced by this band, and that bass line's really influenced by this band. And I said the structure of so-and-so was taken from Rush with a bit of this, and then we've got a bit of like Gates of Delirium here. And he was really, oh my God, and he was going, oh my God, I didn't realise. Yes, you're right, So it's really perplexed me that here I am, a huge progressive rock fan that's grown up with progressive rock, that's set out to make a progressive rock album, okay? And yet virtually every review has said, oh, prog fans, brace yourself, because this isn't quite progressive rock, or not prog as you know it. I feel, and I think this is my idea of what a progressive rock musician is that they are going to try and progress. They're going to try and push the boundaries up. It's almost like the duty of a progressive rock musician to do that. Now, I know that people aren't going to see that an album by Kendrick Lamar or Noah, or an album by, say, The Streets, even though, from my concept of progressive rock, the rules that we set down, you can say, well, that's progressive, isn't it? But of course, to the audience, they see progressive rock as a genre. And genres have rules, and those rules are strict. It's like any other genre. So we start to get with progressive rock music a sort of contradiction. We get two things rubbing up against each other. And I think what it is that progressive rock, one of the things that we would say defines progressive rock would be things like, it's progressive, it's in the name. It's progressing, it's moving forward, it's pushing the boundaries, it's pushing the styles of music. That's inherently in the style, right? But for it to be a style, it needs to conform to certain generic constants, all right? Now, if I was to say what those generic constants are, so say if we said it let's get like a little bit more stricter. And I've talked to this at length in another video. If you're interested in this, go and check out my video about punk and prog, because I've talked about this a lot. But longer tunes that are conceptual, that are complex musically, that use sort of classical music forms, themes that are beyond the normal pop song themes. All of those things, even if we take those rules, I can point to artists, like say if you take Goldie's album, what's it called? The one with Inner City Life on. Inner City Life is a 20-minute track, and it does all those things. It's got instrumental virtuosity in. It also is pushing technology. It's got, lyrics that aren't, all the things I just said are in that tune. And yet, if I went to your average prog fan, they would never stop progressive rock. Because what they really mean when they say progressive rock is stuff that sounds specifically like certain bands. It's a copy of those bands. It's doing the same things, right? Now, I was aware of this when we started to conceptualize the Rant album. There are things in there that are lifted conceptually, not conceptually, compositionally and arrangement straight from classic progressive rock bands. Okay? But I think this is really where the problem comes from. If you could be doing that, but if in any way you are pushing the boundaries, if in any way you're pushing against the form and trying to progress, if in any way, you are trying to take the rules and mess with them, the audience for progressive rock will turn around and go, well, hang on, you're not being progressive here. And so this form, unlike heavy metal, you can say, we need distorted guitar, heavy drums, sort of machine gun type drumming, screamy vocals. And if it's got all those things, then we all go, great, because there's nothing in there that says it should be pushing the boundaries or progressing. There's nothing in that style of music which contradicts itself and says that it should be not what it is. But for me, as a progressive artist, I think when I discovered progressive rock, what happened was I was listening to all these rock bands and there was a certain set of rules and I liked them. But then when I heard the progressive rock bands, they were like ripping that rule book up. They were going, what the hell's going on here? It's gone into a string quartet. Now there's a choir going on. And now they're on some long jazz improvisation. Now they're singing about some planet that's going to invade, the world and all that type of stuff. Continually blowing my mind. That's what I want progressive rock music to do, is to blow my mind. Now, there's another part for this, because it is Prog Festival yesterday. I went and watched some of the bands, and there were some great bands on there, and I'm watching them and I'm listening to them and I'm thinking, but they don't really sound like prog rock bands. Some of them sound like sort of early 80s new wave of British heavy metal bands. Maybe, some of the chord progressions are a little bit more weirder perhaps. But on the whole, I would not say thought that was progressive rock. The amount of singers bands that I've heard that sound like sort of Fleetwood Mackie, or a bit Pink Floydy. I suppose Pink Floyd are proggy, just about. But they're not. No clocks going off like Pink Floyd. No conceptual albums. We're just talking long guitar solos over 2 chords. So a lot of the bands that seem to be quite comfortable in the progressive rock category for me don't sound like progressive rock to me. And I'm there scratching my head thinking, well, this doesn't sound like Gates of Delirium. This doesn't sound like Stars of the Bible Black. It sounds like Fleetwood Mac to me. Sounds safe. Very safe. Middle of the road. How many modern prog bands basically sound like a Eurovision Song Contest entry with a 7/8 section in the middle? Oh, he's getting a bit nasty now. Sorry. But for me, prog's, it's on the tin when you buy the thing. It's on the tin. What it's supposed to do, there it is. It says, and it's supposed to push the boundaries for me, personally. So, going back to this album here, if I just go through it, the first track on is a track called Devils Will Reign, which is 7 minutes long, and then we have a track called Dandelion that's 7 minutes long, and then we have a track called Walk Away, which is nearly 13 minutes long. Then we have a track called The Magician, which is 11 minutes long. We've got no track under 7 minutes on this album. Many of them are like sweets, and I don't mean sweets you eat, I mean sweets in the classical sense. They have multiple parts and there's a lot of themes that emerge and then they're repeated in different ways. So for me, it's doing all the classic prog things. But one of the things that's amazing about this album is the way we structured it was that it starts off with very melodic prog, lovely vocal harmonies, and as you plot it through, the album goes deeper into prog. It goes deeper into prog territory. So we end up with the fourth track, which is called The Magician, and The Magician really gets into real heavy prog areas, you know, and it's got full-on prog lyrics, you know, as you can probably tell. It's about sort of, well, what's it about? I don't want to tell you what it's about. Mind-altering substances being admitted by somebody who's a magician and has got control over things, or maybe they're just a charlatan. We don't know. But anyway, The Magician is full-on prog. And then after that, the album at the end goes beyond prog. And it goes into this sort of electronic world. We're suddenly thrown into the universe. We're into the middle of nowhere. And in that space, you can hear the whole album spinning around. Think about what the album's called. It's called Singularity. Think about what a singularity is. At the end of this album, you actually reach the singularity. And you hear all time and space is all on top of each other, and you hear the whole album spinning around in front of you. This idea we took directly from Rush, from Cygnus X1, where you hear that idea, you know, when they go inside the black hole. I've told you there. How is there anything more prog than that? And then after that, it goes into something which is a lot more electronica based, a lot more ambient electronica based. Really pushes the computer, you know, we really push the drum programming. It is real drumming on there, but the drums have been really pushed and processed, the sounds have been processed, the vocals have been processed. There's a lot going on, converting sort of audio to MIDI and back sampling and all that. And you know, it goes into what I would say is full-on modern prog. So many reviews liked the first track, but didn't, said, oh, you know, I think they became a bit self-indulgent, or they didn't, you know, they sort of went off the rails on the last track. It's been great. We've redone the last track now in a full-on prog mode, so the proggers can appreciate the last track, just to show that we could have done it like that if we wanted to. And a couple of people have said to me, oh, you know, that new version of Singularity is so, I love it so much, as though we didn't know how to do it the first time. We knew exactly what we were doing. You know, we knew what we were doing when we made that track. You know, it's the difference between this idea of prog as a genre and then truly progressive music. So, where have we got to with this? I hope it's exposed my personal, you know, journey through the prog world, where I've been, where I'm trying to go now. It may have rattled a few proggers' cages, but I do understand, you know, if they're buying a prog album, you know, they don't want to buy a reggae album or a dubstep or grime album. They want to buy a prog album. They want it to do what it says on the tin. The only problem is that idea of being progressive and pushing boundaries and, you know, merging genres and all that sort of thing. Is that one of the instructions on the tin of what prog should do? And is it the case that when a prog band is not doing that, they're not actually a prog band? You know, if we could go back in a time machine and go back to Yes in 1970, 71, or Genesis or ELP, right, and stop them from pushing the boundaries, pushing technology, doing stuff that hadn't been done before, taking genres and mixing them, especially new genres that are coming out, would we have had any prog? It's a question to think about. It can be frustrating for musicians who have come to progressive rock because they see some sort of wonderful world where they're allowed to push the boat out, that it would be great if the audience could just bear that in mind and go with them when they do push the boat out. It would be a wonderful thing. I know that so many fans out there, so many fans that support us do see it like that. I know there's a million prog fans out there that are interested in what the artists do. This has really been shown out with Steve Wilson with his latest sort of move from full-on prog to electronic pop music. And a lot of the fans have gone with it and listened to it, and they can still hear the threads, you know. He's been truly progressive, I'm afraid. He's been truly progressive, you know. What is he doing? He's doing the same thing that he was doing before, but the genre's changed. You know. Is it progressive rock anymore? Well, yes and no. It depends on which definition you want to use. That's the answer. You know, if your definition of prog is basic rock music where you're allowed to push the boat out and experiment, you know, and you're allowed to sort of use virtuosity and cleverness and conceptuality and basically a more intellectual form of rock music, which I think is basically what prog is. Then yes, he's still making prog, you know, and who knows where it will go, but you enjoy the journey. But if you see prog as bands that are not just copying the styles of the classic prog bands, but actually blanding them out, making them more palatable, taking away the rough edges so it's more acceptable to an older audience that can't quite take that, well, yeah, then there's that version of prog. Maybe it's the difference between progressive and prog, you know. But I'm sure there'll be a lot of comments on this video saying, oh, you shouldn't categorize music. You know, you're making a mistake even trying to discuss it. But we find music because it's categorized. The whole music industry works on that. Spotify works with that. Bandcamp works with that. If you want to discover new music, you know, the only way to do it is to use categories and genre. You know, as time's gone on, music history-wise, categories have become even more delineated. You know, so progressive rock in the early days was a term that would cover David Bowie. It was a term that would cover Led Zeppelin. You know, now we have math rock, prog metal, neoprog. You know, we have a whole host of different progs to deal with. You know, so categorization is a part of music. It's love it or hate it. It's there. It has to be dealt with. It does cause problems. You know. And there's not much we can do about that. It is a terrible thing. If we didn't have it, I don't think artists could actually get their stuff out there. You know. So as I found, as my story explains, you know, when I made something that wasn't progressive, there was no audience for that whatsoever, because the tiny audience I have for music is the tiny audience I've gained through playing in some fantastic progressive rock bands over the years. But anyway, I think I have made my statement. I can't say much more. If you do want to check out what I've been talking about, here's the album again, Rain, Singularity. You know, we're back to gig now, and we're out there playing it to people. And you know, if you can go and check that out, it's on here on YouTube. You can go and hear it at Spotify. But go and have a listen. I'd love to see whether people think it is prog or not. I think it is full on prog. I think it does exactly what you expect from a progressive rock album. But you now know where I'm coming from, and so you know, maybe what I've tried to do here is to just expose that the problem is I've not been able to solve it. I don't think anyone can solve this problem, but I hope you enjoyed the talk anyway. So if you like the video, like it please. If you want more of these sort of more philosophical discussions, stick it in the comments and subscribe. And you know, keep on listening to music, you know, and once a year at least, just go and listen to something that you'd never normally listen to, and open up your ears and see what happens, because you never know where it may take you. Thank you. Bye.